During one of his last podcasts, Larry Wheels was serious when he shared a very brave confession with the world. Sex addiction, regardless of the specific form the addict is involved in, is an illness as real as it is embarrassing. And sadly, most of those who are struggling with it have very limited options of fighting it, especially if it is a compulsively masturbating man. In case of Larry, it wasn't just a simple confession like, "I was addicted to sex and masturbation." In his confession, Larry above all else made a very bold thesis speculating on the causes of such situation. All the more bold because, after all, we're talking about someone who, first of all, doesn't even have to worry about negative reactions from his viewers. Because after all, we all came to like him for, among other things, his unprecedented transparency in terms of his health, with the most common causes of complications arising from years of abusing anabolic steroids. And secondly, it's not like this person doesn't perfectly know the mechanics of these substances because he's been addicted to them for many years now. Let's get into a brief analysis of the content of that podcast. Larry started here with information on how much that phase cost him financially. He allegedly spent his entire earnings on that, which translates to 5-digit amounts. Although he never stated the exact amounts, every day he would spend from $10,000 to $99,000 on that.
How much is the most you've ever spent?
What's that on?
On these sites and stuff.
Oh, probably like 5 figures a day.
First of all, what's incredibly impressive in itself is the revenue of Western fitness celebrities. Secondly, this proves that regardless of our background or financial status, the mechanism of addiction is always the same. Someone with a problem, and it doesn't matter if it is drugs or alcohol or sex or masturbation, is able to spend literally all the money on that. Let me use this example to explain to you why we get addicted in the first place and how it goes. A mental addiction is tied to a whole array of symptoms. For example, it will be constant seeking of the addicting agent, lowered tolerance to its influence, which also leads to decreased sensation of pleasure, weakened willpower, obsession about taking it, and compulsive thoughts that can come back even after many years of being clean. Then there's also lying to yourself and potentially physical devastation. It doesn't take all of the symptoms to diagnose an addiction, though. This mechanism is tricky, and its subsequent negative effects come over time. Developing an addiction is related to disturbed functioning of the brain structures that form the so-called reward system, which is responsible for feeling pleasure. This is actually about interconnected limbic areas of the brain where the emotional and cognitive spheres intertwine. It is the biggest part of the brain, which also matures the latest, which explains in a way why it is so dangerous to experiment with stimulants in adolescence. That's where the so-called hormones of happiness are excreted, which are dopamine and serotonin. Turning to alcohol, drugs, or watching erotic content causes the endings of axons to secrete the above-mentioned neurotransmitter, dopamine, which over time, as the addiction progresses, damages the neural paths. The reward system is responsible for the motivation to act in a way that an animal or a human will always try to aim for obtaining the reward. And with every subsequent time, a particular dose will cause a weaker and weaker stimulation of synapses, which means that in order to achieve the same level of excitement or even surpass it, you reach for more and more. Over time, achieving pleasure related to a developed and memorized pattern will become a priority for the brain, which causes the rationality in decision-making to vanish. An alcoholic will spend his last money for alcohol even if he is hungry, whereas a sex addict will spend it on sex worker, expensive VR goggles, or just like Larry Wheels on sex cams. As he observed, this may seem weird that a bodybuilder, especially one that is very recognized and liked, making at least a few $1,000,000 a year, would actually get addicted to masturbating to a webcam, especially that it is despite the evident ability to find a sex partner, as he is also in a relationship and with a very attractive woman too. And this is where we get to the breakthrough moment in the whole podcast, because according to Wheels, the addiction was caused by taking testosterone. But here's the thing, it was in therapeutic doses, which is a testosterone replacement therapy. I don't know if the idea behind the treatment was to get people to start talking about Wheels on social media again so that he could continue expanding his reaches. Maybe someone paid him because the magical TRT remains in style after all. And those who are interested in it most often are guys who don't even need such treatment and, to be honest, wouldn't benefit from it that much. That's because TRT, as in a therapy that consists of providing the body with artificial testosterone, is not a steroid cycle. The dose of testosterone that is prescribed by a doctor is meant to reflect the natural level in a healthy man. And although, compared to a natural, a person on TRT will have a certain advantage, it will not be significant. First of all, some doctors schedule the days of taking the hormone in a way that maintains its level on a relatively constant level the entire time. And as we know, in natural people, this has its fluctuations. When translated to the real world or the gym, on the other hand, the result will be more or less that the next day after heavy partying combined with lovemaking, in case of a natural, the testosterone level will lower a little. But in someone on TRT, it won't. And how will this influence muscle building? Well, not much actually. And when the doses taken are a little bigger and the testosterone level will be maintained higher than in a natural, the gains will be once again only slightly bigger. In practice, it is better to invest in a trainer and a better diet. For someone with a normal testosterone level, this is objectively speaking just not worth it. Because TRT is not a cycle, it is for the entire life, which will start requiring either frequent injections or rubbing yourself with special gels, or taking large amounts of pills a few times a day. And in this case, even for those who easily swallow big objects, the problem might be fish-smelling burps. Not to mention the elevated risk of circulatory illnesses, prostatic hyperplasia, acne, gynecomastia, falling hair, and all the other consequences of the side effects of testosterone, which actually often occur even with small doses. The libido, while on TRT doses, although it will be higher than in someone with legitimate deficiency in the production of this hormone, will not be significantly higher than that of a healthy person. And that's not all. Over time, the androgen receptors become less and less sensitive, which means that always taking the same amount of testosterone will not cause an equally strong response in the body's reactions to a particular amount of the hormone, and the experienced libido will return to the default level. That's because it defines more than just the testosterone level. After all, let's not forget about the obvious dependency of libido on the activity of the brain's frontal lobe and secretion of dopamine. Let's say that we may have very high testosterone, but when the stimulus standing before your eyes will not be stimulating enough for your brain, there won't be any love out of it anyway. And if you artificially, temporarily elevate your needs and this stimulus will become attractive again, it will be for a limited time only. Of course, we could also list a few more factors that influence libido. Testosterone is very important in this puzzle, but it's not the only one. Sex addiction may affect both people with low and high testosterone levels alike. What is interesting, it is very common for people with a very low level of this hormone to get addicted, because the addiction is not just about libido, but about dopamine. With high testosterone and high libido, the dopamine stimulation required to achieve an erection and satisfaction may be relatively small. On the other hand, someone on the opposite end of the spectrum, in order to achieve satisfaction, may need special variations of this activity. Personally, I see a few possible explanations of why Larry listed TRT as a cause of his addiction. First of all, as I mentioned before, this may be a desire to get attention, and his words are obviously very controversial. On top of that, TRT has become a marketing product, an expensive one, which is why many people may want to push it on as many potential customers as possible. Another option presumes honesty in Larry's intentions, as well as addiction caused by steroids indeed, but not in the way he presented it. Let's not forget that this is someone who for years has been addicted to steroids and taking heavy combinations of different substances. The kind of testosterone doses that Wheels dealt with have been bodybuilding doses for years, which means he didn't increase the level just a little, like 20 or 30% compared to a natural's values, which would be, say, around 700 or even 900 nanograms per deciliter. In his case, it was entire grams of testosterone, or doses putting him on the level of 5-10,000 nanograms per deciliter, or maybe even more. Bodybuilder Dallas McCarver could even have a concentration of up to 55,000 nanograms per deciliter. When on a heavy cycle, libido needs to be incomparably higher than the TRT doses. And it's not like testosterone is the only steroid Wheels used. Some of the substances are literally known for developing deviations in people taking them, like the famous trenbolone. There is even a special discussion group on Reddit devoted to this topic, where the users share their oftentimes crazy stories, even things like changing their orientation. This is where I will once again bring up the reduced sensitivity of androgen receptors, which comes over time with the users. Larry Wheels has been pumping himself with different kinds of steroids for years, artificially maintaining his libido on a level that is unattainable for a natural. So in his case, would a testosterone dose on the replacement therapy level result in the same kind of libido increase as it would in your case, for example? This is of course a rhetorical question. Larry's baseline needs to be very high in this aspect, which is why a low testosterone dose may not have much effect on him. And while on TRT doses, he may feel like someone with deficiency. And it is this fact that, in my opinion, could drive him to look for sensations stronger than his woman spending tons of money on webcams.